Alrighty, thank you for your time, mate. So we've got Chris Barnes from F45 in Sydney here, and he's going to take us through particularly some really, really simple, straightforward, functional exercises that you guys can do in your home where it's most likely that you're going to do them more often. And in my experience, Chris, you can chime in, but in my experience, 15 minutes every second day is going to be far more effective than trying to find once a week for an hour or trying to book in that slot with the trainer or all of those sort of things, where obviously going to a trainer is going to be the best option, but not always an option for guys that are training 14, 15, 16 hours a week. So what I wanted to get a sense from you, mate, I guess I'm just going to dive straight in. I'm just going to throw some questions at you and we'll just see where it leads us, if that
sounds good. Sounds good.
So the first thing I wanted to distinguish for a lot of the guys is the difference between mobility and strength work and when you would do one over the other.
So mobility and flexibility are two clearly different things. So mobility is to do with your joints and the ability for your joints to go through a particular range without being loaded under stress, I guess, and it's to move freely. When we talk in flexibility, we're now talking about muscles more and they're being forced through a range of movement. Now, if you don't have good mobility, you won't get good flexibility. Okay. Now, mobility is very important for any endurance athlete and an athlete who works in especially what we call a linear type movement, where you're just constant repetition moving that over and over. For guys like you, hip flexion and then that constant movement. So you're going to get tight through your hips. If you don't improve your mobility in those sections, and then adding to your mobility in those areas, increase your strength in the areas that are connected to the tight mobility areas, you're going to be a weaker athlete. So if I want to go back to hips for a second and try and make it easy, if you are tight through your hips due to the linear movement that we're doing, the constant hip flexion through cycling and running, you're going to be weak in your butt muscles. Okay, because you're too tight in your hip muscles. So we need to improve our strength in our butt muscles to increase our mobility through our hip muscles. So typically, if you have an issue on one side of your body, it's to do with the opposite side of your body. Now,
particularly a weakness on the other side of the body, really, isn't it?
Yes, definitely you'll be weak on the other side. And that's just due to the over-tension.
And that's not just like a left-right thing. That's also an up-down thing. So I remember a great physio, Nick Torrance, taught me once that a very tight thoracic area through the back can actually be one of the leading causes of Achilles tendonitis.
Yep.
Because that chain is just tight and it just goes all the way down.
So your spinal column houses your central nervous system. So to move your fingers, something has to happen by your spine. And obviously there's a connection from brain to spine as well, which then makes the fingers go out here. So if you have compression and tightness through your spine, it's going to have a negative effect. It's whatever part it is throughout the body, depending on what vertebrae is under tension. And a lot of that's to do with the fascia as well. So the fascia surrounds your spine and it's in cases, it goes all the way through your body. It's a connective tissue from toe to head and back down to toe. And if that's under tension as well, that's going to lead to a lower performing athlete because you have your muscles and your nervous system are basically trapped in the inability to move.
So if mobility is about getting a good range of motion through joints, so we would look at obviously our shoulder joint moving through, our hip joints, those sort of things. Can you give us a demonstration of a couple of exercises that are straight to the point, great mobility exercises that we would do pre-exercise?
Definitely. So one of the best tests that you would do, it's a worldwide test, this one. It's not something that I would be making up, but it's called the kneeling knee to wall test. Essentially what you do, you drop down on one knee and you align your knee up to a wall which will be in front of you. So if we would envisage that this box here was a wall, you'd line your toe up to it, and let's just say that was a vertical wall here. you'd put your knee to the wall. So the reason why we also start down low, because that's our first point of contact to the ground. So I always start my mobility work from the ankle. Once my knee touches that wall, if my knee can touch the wall, I would bring my toe back away from the wall, just a couple of centimeters at a time. Push out, it's touching the wall, bring it back. And I work out what my mobility is. Once my heel starts lifting, let's just say it's there, I would measure that distance. So it's an actual measurable test as well. My goal over time is to increase that distance, to reduce the distance, obviously from toe to shin, or the distance away from the wall. It's quite a common test. I think 7 centimeters is the recommended distance you want to be away. And then the more you're moving away, the better.
And I know for triathletes, considering the amount of dorsiflexion we go through with the cycling and the running, that tight ankles and tight through the Achilles is a huge one. So that's a really, really good test, and also good to remember that that's great advice to start at the bottom and work our way up.
It's called a joint by joint approach when you do testing through your body, and you always start at the ground, obviously, because that's that first point of contact. Your ankle joint is sorry, it just slipped my mind. What sort of joint? It's a joint that basically, it's a stability joint, sorry, which only moves that forward and back action. So dorsiflexion and flexion, what Chris just mentioned.
Yep.
Your next set of joints up are your knee joints. Correction, it's a mobility joint. Your ankle rolls as well. Your knee joint is now the stability joint, and that's why knee injuries are so common in sort of any sort of sporting realm, and especially for a athlete who works in that linear movement of constant forward and back. Okay, so I'm going to get a little bit more into that after as well. So after I do my ankles, I'll then work my knee mobility. After my knee, I go to hip. Hip goes back to mobility. So ankle mobility, knee stability. Hip is mobility again now. Okay, and as you work up your body, the changes actually change from mobility to stability, each joint up, or each major joint up. And it's important to actually specifically work those areas to what that body is. So your hip becomes now mobility, because we can move our hips and sway our hips around in a circle. Okay, then you have your thoracic area, or your thoracic spine, which is stability, which is that forward and backward movement only. We hit our shoulders after that, which is our mobility again, because we can move in all different directions.
Yeah, those ball and socket joints, like the shoulder and the hip, are going to be the ones that you can get that greater range of motion from, that you want to use.
Yep. And you'll find by doing your mobility work, starting at the ground and building your way up, you will have better mobility through your hips from doing your ankles and your knee first, as opposed to working back down to the ground, because the area below the joint is stiff and it's not allowing you to move. So that's another key reason why you'd start at the ground and work up.
So what's a good hip one? Because I'm always banging on with the guys pre-run. You walk out the door, and particularly during winter now, where you're walking out the door and real feel might be 5 degrees. You're getting out of a warm bed. 10 minutes later, you're dressed, you're ready to go, but real feel is 5 degrees. What's a great hip mobility exercise pre-run?
So it's going to look funny, but it's literally feet outside the hips and just circles.
Yeah.
Feel certain parts of those circles. For me, it's there to get that area of my hip. I'm not getting much here or here, although I'd still work those areas to as far as I can go. And that's a typical area for most people there, once the hip starts going forward. And you'll find anyone who sits at a desk a lot in that hip flexion, or anyone who rides a bike and runs a lot, which has the hip flexion, which is that action there, you're going to find that action there is going to be super tight for you.
Yeah. And I know that's a really common one. Tight quads from all the running, tight hip flexion from all of the sitting that we do, leading into tight obliques. That whole front chain through there just gets super tight. And as you say, it's a battle for those weaker primary running muscles, the glutes and the hamstrings, to actually get any action going.
Yeah, it's very easy to get an imbalance through poor mobility, get an imbalance in your musculature, because you can't use your glutes or your hamstrings properly when you're cycling if your hips are too tight. So you're just going to wear that front side of your body out.
Yeah. Which I think a lot of guys have seen, particularly if they're, you're 70 or 80K into a half Ironman bike leg and you start getting quad cramps and all that sort of thing from just that excessive use and complete tightness, being in that time trial position, coming into the race already super tight through that area, which is common and that sort of thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So what about some mobility through the ball and socket shoulder joint?
So for ball and socket joint, it's always worked backwards with your circles, and that's because when we swim, we work forwards, and we cause what we do this internal rotation, which is the most unhealthiest position for your shoulder to be when you're rolled over like that when you're swimming, for instance. So when we do our shoulder work, it's small backward circles, and what we're actually doing is activation also on the quads and the rotator cuff group muscles, which are 4 small muscles in the back of the shoulder. So we want to tighten them up, as well as what we're trying to do is open our chest up as well, which Chris will talk a lot about in swimming. By having your chest open, you could answer that story better, Chris, but we would mention having your chest open when you swim, for instance, or when you run, you want to have your chest open too. So my mobility for that is to work my reverse circles here.
One of the ones I like too, sorry to interrupt, just quickly, while it just jumped into my head, was that very simple one where you hold a broom handle and go over and take the shoulder through that range of motion through and back. I mean, that can be a little aggressive for some people.
Yep.
But I find that one quite, and you bring your hands closer and closer. To,
you guys know what Chris was talking about with that one? Because I can quickly show you.
Yeah, if you can demonstrate that, that'd be great. Yeah, because I think that's a really easy one for people to be doing at home.
And one of your benefits to doing this stretch as well is it's a measurable exercise.
Yeah.
So you get your broomstick or your pipe, whatever it might be, and you might know that that's 1 meter apart because you've got a marking on it, which is 1 meter. And it's just simply getting your hands over and back. At the moment, my shoulders are quite sore, but I am working on that, and that's my width there. Yep. But it's not uncommon to see people do it at that area there, which I've got no chance on at the moment.
Yeah.
So using something like this that you can measure and over time gradually improve, like your training. You don't want to try and go from 0 to hero in a couple of days. You want to do it over a longer period of time.
But I think one of the awesome things, and to the point of this entire conversation, is an exercise like that. It costs you nothing. That's a broom handle that you've got at home. That, as you say, you can put a mark, a 1 meter mark on either side, and slowly start trying to work your way inwards. As a weekly goal, you can come in by whatever you like, a centimetre if you like, and it's something that you can pick up and you can do for 30 seconds to a minute before you walk out the door for anything. Just opens up the pecs, gets that shoulder mobility there, and just completely releases through the traps and all the way down through those back muscles as well.
So that is regarded as a mobility exercise, and like I mentioned earlier, increasing your mobility will increase your flexibility, which is exactly what Chris is saying now. It will open up your chest muscles. It will activate through the rear side of your body, so you do actually create lengthened muscles around the shoulder girdle.
Great. That's some awesome first advice. Feel free, guys, at any time. I haven't seen any questions yet, so feel free if you want to chuck questions in as we go. There's no need, I will also say, to take any notes. If anyone is, I will be getting down some detailed notes, and then they'll be available as a download thing for you guys moving forward from here. So you don't need to worry. Plus, you'll have, obviously, the recording for the future. So, mate, probably the biggest thing now, and the thing you probably get asked all the time, and I know you were really good with me when we were working together with this, is simple strength exercises that someone can do that are specific to endurance athletes, runners, cyclists, that sort of thing, that someone can do in their lounge room. That busy person, they get home, had a shocking day at work, I've given them 15 to 20 minutes, they've got to tick the box, they've got to make shit go green. How are we going to work through the body to make this person feel like that, okay, I've ticked the box here?
So there's a big misconception with strength training and endurance athletes, that people think that because they're endurance athletes, they can only do endurance type training. which is actually incorrect. Strength training, a lot of research has you up over a 10% increase in your lactic threshold. So that means your ability to survive longer before you hit that fatigue stage when you're absolutely pedal to the metal. Okay, so that's something that's very important to know. So it might encourage you to do some strength training a little bit more. We talk about working in a linear action, so that constant repetitive movement in the forward mode. So I think running and cycling, we're not deviating left or right in any way at all. So adding a movement pattern which has you deviating left and right, it's going to improve your mobility and also the stability, mainly in the muscles that surround the muscles that are creating the forward and back type action, or sagittal plane type movement action. For me, I always go to a lunge first or a step up type exercise first for any athlete. And I'll use this in a warm up type scenario as well, or situation as well, because you can do it with your body weight to start with as a warm up by stepping onto a box or lunging. I typically would say lunge backwards before forwards due to the stress that goes through the knee on a forward lunge. I'll then do the movements under load. So if I'm stepping up onto a box, I'll then hold something. A lot of people have jars in the cupboard or whatever, or a brick in the backyard and a couple of steps. You can use those. You only need an elevated platform and a small amount of weight, because you will be stepping up with one leg as opposed to leg pressing with two, which is a lot easier, I guess, or your strength more than quadruples when you're working with both feet together simultaneously. So I've got a little step here, like so. A couple of key things to think about with the step up though. So we want to activate the muscles around the hip and around the knee area. So the best way to do that is to make sure your whole foot is on the step. That will activate the muscle around the butt area, I guess, by having your heel in there, because it's a pulling action. So I'm pulling back on my ankle to elevate myself onto the platform. So a little bit further up the body now. So I'm doing that pull back action to get myself up. But what I'm doing here is also thinking about my knee position also. That's not going to collapse in. If it is, it's telling me that my stability in the hip area or in the glute area, I'm actually quite weak. So if I'm collapsing in whilst trying to step up, I've got no strength in my butt at all, which would also probably tell me that I could be too tight through my hip area. Okay. Now, if I can hold my knee out and then power up and get my hip drive forward, I'm going to get the glute workout that's actually required to perform that exercise correctly and effectively. Exercise 2 I'd probably want to go to would be a deadlift. Couple of main reasons why. It's a full body workout. It's been proven, it's been around since gladiator years, and we're still deadlifting now in a competitive world. So, and we're using typically the muscles down the posterior side of the body, which is the back side of your body. Again, these are the muscles that become weak due to hip flexion through our legs from running and cycling, and then the shoulders with our swimming action. So we'll end up like Quasimodos if we kept doing swimming, running and riding only without strengthening that rear side of our body. Even without exercising, your body would end up into that position in our modern lifestyles, because we're either at a chair all day or on our phone all day. And then just typical work life that you do, our bodies will internally rotate. So by doing these big moves now, like your deadlift, where we're going to train those muscles down that back side of our body and get everything tight in one go, and get what they call, there's a connection between the muscles as well. By activating them and getting them working together and training together, that's going to pull our body straight and actually help with our projecting ourselves forward in any swim, run, ride action that we do.
Awesome. What about some upper body stuff, mate? That is 2 really, really good solid ones. Yep. For the lower body.
For myself, I would typically want to work a lat pull down. And that's just due to swimming. And I actually went 2 years without doing a lat pull down, and I've got terrible shoulders at the moment, which I'm nursing my way out of it again. And that's, my deltoids just get thrashed with that internal rotation, and my chest muscles are tightening up too much from swimming. my lat pull down, what it's going to do is pull my shoulder blades back down into the bottom pockets where they're meant to be. So your lat muscle is this big muscle here. So what I want to work on doing in my pull down is with a straight arm, I want to I want to depress my shoulder blades. So from here, the first action I do is that, even though my arm stays, I don't know if you're actually seeing that, are you?
Yeah.
So even though my arm is straight, I'm going to pull my whole arm down. Is that clear at all? Yeah.
Yep.
So if you were to think about your armpits, whilst having straight arms, you want to pull your armpits into your hips. So that area down to or pull your armpits to your bum. Okay, and then I'll start my movement there. So that's going to reset my shoulder blade position or my scapula where it has to be.
How would you, sorry, Matt, so how would you do something like that at home though, a lat pull down?
So I like using rubber bands.
Yeah, right. Great. So this leads me into some of the equipment that we want to get.
So the equipment that I would actually recommend for you, you could probably buy a complete kit for 20 to 30 bucks maximum, but you'll have a lot of equipment and a lot of different tension variations as well. So these things I buy on eBay, and I'll buy 4 different resistance levels for up sometimes less than $10.
So later on, I'll get the link from you for the eBay where you get it, yeah?
Right now, because of COVID, guys, these are super hard to get and they're probably going to be quadruple the price. So we're not really shopping at a good time, but still you'll buy a set of this quite cheap. Typically, they're very, very cheap, but COVID, everything is actually out of stock worldwide, basically. So it's not a real good time to shop, but it won't be long before it is. But yeah, we'll send those links.
Thank you. And then, so how would you set that up? Obviously, a lat pull down, what you'd throw it over something, or would a seated row be better, or? So
seated row is really good as well. That was the next one I was going to show you. But if you had something, a bar, you'd wrap this around your bar like so.
Yeah.
Feed it back on itself, and then you've got like a lat pull down where that's like a cord of some sort.
Perfect.
Seated row is really easy to do by yourself. There are some negatives to doing this if you have poor posture that you're going to slouch. However, if you are slouching, it's a good way of learning that you've got to get out of that position. But I've got this wrapped around my feet at the moment. I'm sitting up straight, and I've got different hand grips. I've got my palms together grip. I've got an overhand grip. That's the grip I want to get out of because that's my internal rotation grip. So I'm going to turn my hands outwards a bit and externally rotate my humerus, so the upper arm. But by doing that, you'll notice my back position changes as well. So from internal to external, you'll see that slouch here, and then I lose my slouch when I pull back. From there, I'll then do my seated row type movements, where I'm pulling my elbows together behind my back. So any pull movement like that, try and think about initiating the movement with your elbows as opposed to your hands. So using your hands, it's going to make you use your arm muscles more. Think about, even though the exact same thing is happening, if you even do this by yourself, just seated where you are, think about pulling your elbows together behind your back. You're going to feel those big back muscles contract together. Pull your hands back, nothing happens at all in your back. Okay, so that action there, you'll feel your back muscles without a weight, you'll feel them tighten up together. So that's how I do my seated row with that. I can be funky with this as well. So I can stand up, I can put it on one foot, like so, and then I can do single arm row type actions as well. Okay, this is quite functional as well, but also it's relative to swimming. So we do that twisting rotation movement when we swim and we roll our shoulders forward. Now we're going to do that twisting rotation movement that we do when we swim, but with a pullback or resistance against us. So again, that's going to help with our opening our chest up type area and sort of get it out of the internally rotated position as well, but still have the ability to rotate our bodies, if that makes sense. Yep.
That's awesome, buddy. Particularly, I think one of the key things, and I remember you were into me about this all the time, particularly later on in the reps, make sure those palms are facing in. Yep. For that, the importance of when you bring the palms over, of how that internally rotates the shoulder and brings that and gets you into that position that we want to get out of. Yep. So just a simple change of those hands the way it just opens and drops the shoulders down so that we can set that movement correctly from the start. I think that's really key.
It's definitely key. What I also tell my guys to do is check themselves out in the mirror.
Yeah.
And most triathletes, either yourself or the person who you're training next to, is quite lean. If you've got one of your fellow trainers or yourself, if you just do that action there, you're going to see in the mirror what's going on with your body. Now, down that rear side of your body here, you've got all your rotator muscles. You're going to see them basically do that action just by doing that external rotation movement type there.
Yeah.
So look at your body and see what happens when you add movement to your body and see what's going on. Because if you do feel those muscles pull back, it'll actually make you do it more. And you can actually walk around and squeeze back, and then you let your arms go and you hold yourself in that position there, which is, you're probably going to feel like you're walking around with your boobs sticking out. You're not, you're actually standing up straight.
Yeah, it's a great postural awareness exercise, that. It's very, very good. Just to check, if you've been sitting at a desk for 4 hours or you've been on the phone for the last couple of hours, it's great to just stand up and just drop that down like that and stick them up, isn't it?
Yep, 100%. So I always tell my clients to look at themselves in any reflection that they walk past, whether it be a shop front or a car window.
Yeah.
Have a look at what's going on with your posture, because you're going to find your head's probably about that far forward of your neck or of your spinal column, which is very damaging to you. But that's going to reduce any shoulder mobility you have because of the load going through your upper back or your upper spine.
Yeah. Further to that, that's also an excellent thing to do when you're out running, guys, is to just, you run through past the shop windows, check your form, see how that lean is, see how that posture is, and how long you can get and how tall you can hold your posture when you're running as well. It's a great tip. Frankie's got a question. If we're doing 10 to 15 minutes a day, is it best to focus on the same area of the body each day, or to cover the whole body in each 15-minute session?
I would probably stick to one area, and then I'll tailor my program around because you guys do swim, riding and running specifically, and you know what your routine is. I would want to do my strength training before I do my specific training. Okay. So that way I have strength to actually do my specific training, which is my swim, ride and run. So you look at your calendar. Let's say that you're running on swimming on Thursday morning. I would want to make sure at least 48 hours before that swim session, I'm doing something to get my shoulders activated. I probably have a bit of mobility and stretching through my chest. I'm definitely doing my pull type movements. So my lat pull down and my seated row type movements. And then obviously whenever you ride, you'd probably want to be doing your glute activation exercises and your posterior chain type exercises, again, 48 hours before that.
That's a good way to stack your program, is to bring it in that way. Or even the night before. Would you think that might be an effective thing, 10 to 15 minutes, or is that too soon?
You actually can do it the night before. But what that's also going to offer you is fatigue in your specific training session, which is what's going to happen in a race situation also.
I don't mind that. I think that's actually a good thing. If you go, I think because your awareness of those muscle groups that you're about to go and use is so much more, switched on. If you go out the door and you've just done, or your glutes are still a bit sore from a little bit of activation, mobility and stuff like that, it's great. You feel like they're switched on there and you can use them effectively.
And having that awareness of that slight bit of soreness will also identify that you're actually using that muscle now when you're running, as opposed to letting absolutely nothing.
Yeah, great. Good. One thing that I think is crucial, mate, is the most poorly executed but most crucial exercise to do, and that's the body weight squat. So what I'd love you to do is take us through your version of a body weight squat, either one to going to a sitting down position and then standing up, and also then segue into one of the best bang for buck exercises that I think, and that's the one-legged squat.
Yep.
So if we could go through those two, that would be great.
Okay, yep, done. So getting into the seated squat position, it's regarded one of the best exercise or one of the best positions to put your body into. If you've been to Southeast Asia, you would have seen the locals there, how they sit. It's called the Southeast Asian squat. So typically what that look like is flat feet, ankles just outside the hips, back up nice and straight with a high body position. Now, even mine at the moment, because I haven't done bugger all training, isn't really that good, okay? So a lot of people would be here with their heels elevated. So if you can get here, this is transferable to sport and power output and force production. If you can get yourself into that position, you're gonna be obviously a better athlete. Now, to get to that position, you obviously need to do exercises. So with a basic squat, it's ankles just outside the hips, toes slightly turned out. Your knee has to track out over your toe or your pinky toe as you drop your bum to the ground. So my mobility is getting lower even just after a couple of movements up and down than it was from the start, okay? Now, yours may not get that low to start with. So you work to your movement allows you. Now, even if you're in that position there and it's still hard, or you feel your ankles are lifting, or your body is falling forward, there are other things that you can add to that to help protect your body and to execute the movement safely, and that's by using a wall. So I would stick my bum on the wall here, and my feet are about 30 centimeters in front of the wall. Foot position is the same. Now I can slide my bum down the wall without falling backwards. Over time, I would remove myself away from the wall. If you're outside, if you're in a park and you don't have a wall behind you or something to slide down, elevating your heels on an object about that high will also help. If you do need, and then here we go. So if you notice that you need to elevate your heels, that's going to tell you that your ankle mobility is quite poor. Okay, so your ability to get your bum down may not be to do with your legs, it might be to do with your ankles, which again is why we always start our mobility at the ankle and then work.
So you could go back to that first exercise, working.
Definitely go back to that, yep.
Stepping into a wall and a simple measurement. What did you say, 7 centimeters was the standard?
7 centimeters is sort of the average or the standard. Yep.
Right, so we want to get a little bit beyond that. What would you consider to be good?
I think 10? It's 13.
Wow, okay. Wow. All right. So there's a couple of ends of the spectrum for people to, something certainly for people to work towards. That's awesome. One-legged squat. So then how do we segue? Let's say after 2-3 months, we're progressing really, really well. One-legged squats, particularly for the guys who are running big mileage. We've got a couple of guys here that are running big mileage, and I love giving them one-legged squats for the strength.
So the negative to a one-legged squat is if you're tight through your hips and you're weak through your glutes, it's going to be hard to get your butt down to the ground. But you can get yourself all those joints into the exact same position without sitting down as such. It is because it is so advanced, and that would be to step up. And that's why when I mentioned before, one of the best exercises is a step up. So I've got a box just here now. So I'll squat is this position here. I've got my bum down, I've got this bend through my knee, which we sort of are now seeing. But if I'm doing a step up on a box, I'm now in that same position, okay? My back is straight, which is quite important also, so I can now even add some upper back activation by squeezing my shoulders back, okay? I'm now just gonna step up, watching my knee that it stays out when I step up, as opposed to letting it collapse in. And I can stand up to that straight position quite safely as well. I've also got my leg that's on the ground to sort of spot me in a way as well. So if I can't push up on my foot that's on the step, I can use my grounded foot to spot me, but I can just give a little bit of a push off the ground. Over time, my goal is to not do the push off the floor or the ground. Then to increase that, I would start adding weight and load to the exercise as well. Another way to get strong at that is a lowering phase as well. So I would lower under control as opposed to dropping down into the ground.
So you might do it on a 5-second count or something on the way down and come up on a 1 or 2 second count or something like that.
Yep, I would always contract with force, because when you move through any step or pedal stroke or swim stroke, you don't do it easy. You want to do it with force, so you can actually get from A to B quicker. So when I contract or when I shorten the muscle, it's done aggressively. But when I lengthen the muscle, it's done under control.
Gotcha. Good. There's only really one more question I had, and that was the simple, very simple equipment. We did mention the bands. What else would you recommend that guys want to have an arsenal there of stuff that they can very easily and cheaply, post-COVID, they can cheaply have, and it's going to tick their boxes?
So again, COVID's fucked everything really for buying equipment, but kettlebell would be my go-to weight when they're available. I don't know if you can actually buy a decent kettlebell in Australia at the moment. A couple of weeks ago you couldn't, but I'll only get the competition grade size kettlebell as well, just because it's so multi-usable with different exercises. You could, to the point you can handstand on these if you wanted to handstand on these. So the more different exercises you can get out of these, obviously the better bang per buck you're going to get out of the equipment. So typically an 8 kilo kettlebell shouldn't cost you any more than $25. I would have an 8 and a 12 and a 16 in my arsenal. Even though I might be able to pick up a 35 or a 36 or a 40, I'd still only get an 8, 12 and a 6, because I typically want to add the unilateral movement or my step up single limb type movements, or even if it's a press type movement, that single limb again type movements for me. Because that's how we work when we swim, obviously, and when we step and run. So I want to strengthen my muscles in the movements that they would typically want to go through. So my kettlebell would be probably my first weight. Now, because I can chest press, so laying flat on my back without a bench, I can do a press movement. I can do a pull movement. I can deadlift. I can squat. I can swing. If I'm going to the beach, I can do my guns. Most important to have them. But they're so multi-usable, these devices, and that's why they're so popular. And they've been around for 300-400 years now. Yeah. But yeah, they're in every gym, so there's a reason for it because of how they can be used. The next thing, if depending on budget, would be a barbell and plate weights. I would get the Olympic size plate weights and barbells personally for myself because of the height it lets you be off the ground when you're lifting a weight off the ground. A lot of the ones with the smaller plates, which are this big, it's just not safe for anyone, especially who's over the age of about 25, to be picking those weights up off the ground. Your body's not designed to bend down and pick up a heavy weight from that low, even though we may think we can, or it's relative sometimes. If you're a moving house, you've got to bend down and pick a box up off the ground. It's not something you always do. With weight training, you want to think about repetition and volume like you do with your swim, run, ride. So you need to be able to repeat repetition after repetition of picking up from a safe height.
And with a really, really good movement, like obviously a safe movement and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Once your back starts flexing, you're starting to get into a no-go zone. And using mirrors or someone working out with you, they can guide you on that and what's going on as well. But once your back isn't straight, then adding load to that, you're just going to increase chance of back injury.
I've got a question here about neck mobility. Any good, which is obviously crucial, obviously for safety-wise, but also for swimming. And swimming is where most people will get most of their neck problems from being in that hyper-extended position. What's some good neck mobility? Sorry to put you on the spot, but a neck mobility exercise.
Okay. I typically just do forward and back movement and then tilt movements.
Yeah.
Okay. But with that as well, I also do strength-based movements. So I'll go through my mobility first, but then I'll apply pressure. I'm pushing my head forward and my hand back. And I do it to that side and I do it to that side. So I've actually got strength to be able to turn my head around. Even though I know how to do it, I might not be good at swimming, but at least I can do it perfectly, coach.
Love it. Nice. Well,
any form of mobility requires strengthening type as well. Otherwise, you're just going to get too loose, and you won't have the strength to lift your head up or twist your head in the axis that it's meant to.
Yeah, great. Well, look, I'll put those down in some notes, and any of that equipment that you can recommend, I might put that together in a little bit of a thing for the guys. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that, mate?
Look, for strength training for the athletes, if you're not doing it, then you won't
Not to mention the evidence around improving bone density, muscle density, those sort of
things. Exactly that as well, yeah.
Awesome.
But I'm in Sydney. If anyone wants help, please reach out. I'd love to help you guys.
Thank you so much.
Morning.
It's been awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate you taking some time out and helping us with some of those really, really simple things. I'm onto these guys all the time, but often the feedback I get is, look, I don't have time. So I want to make it as easy as I possibly can for these guys to go through 4 or 5 really simple exercises. Either they're walking out the door in a session or they're at home, and preferably they don't even need to put down their beer to go through these exercises.
And that's why it's so important to actually understand the benefits from it. So as the typical health benefits, but the specific improvements you can get in your sport by doing strength training, because you're probably more likely to now want to go do a bit of strength training if you know it can improve your results drastically. Because if you're going to spend so much time doing it, then you might as well, add that extra 15-20 minutes and get maximal benefits out of it.
Well, as you say, 10 to 12%. I mean, look, if you were to say to people that you will just stay injury-free in doing it, that would be enough. But as you say, the performance gains from just developing a greater awareness of the musculature and the way your body moves is what leads to a lot of those gains, and the consistency of the training because you're staying injury-free for long periods of time.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big case. I case study myself quite regularly, and I was trying my hardest to drop size. And so I stopped doing weight training. And the day I stopped doing weight training, my body's gone to shit. I haven't had an injury. I've had nothing. And I'm now 3 years. I've started my weight training again, and I'm nursing my way out of injury. But 2 years of not doing weights, and it's the worst thing I've ever done for myself.
Yeah. See, it even happens to the professionals, eh?
Yeah.
Well, mate, thanks again. Great to catch up even like this, and I'll talk to you offline some more about everything else. But thank you so much, guys, for your time. If you've got any other questions, I will post this in the private Facebook group, and we can continue the conversation there. And Chris is always available in Sydney as well, for obviously if you want to go down to Surrey Hills and do some of the stuff. Have you got people coming in now? What's the go there?
Yeah, so we opened today.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, just today. So that's why I'm in.
Rock on.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great to hear, mate. Well, look, I'll be back in July, so you'll be one of the first people I bail up and get up there.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, mate, for your time, and thank you everyone for coming. And we'll chat soon.
See you guys.